You know what? Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who think they can walk all over you the most. And today, I'm gonna tell you about the time my sister-in-law learned that lesson the absolute hardest way possible. But before we dive into this chaos, let me just say, if you've ever had a family member overstay their welcome and completely disrespect your space, you're gonna love this story. And if you're someone who thinks house rules are just suggestions, well, buckle up buttercup, because this one's for you too. Now, picture this, it's a Tuesday evening, I'm finally settling down after a long day at work, expecting to come home to my peaceful sanctuary, and instead I walk into what can only be described as a tornado of disrespect wrapped in cigarette smoke with a side of attitude. Yeah, that's where we're starting today. My sister-in-law, let's call her Sarah, had just moved in with us temporarily, or so she said, and apparently thought my house rules were more like friendly suggestions. Spoiler alert, they weren't. And by the end of this story, she learned exactly what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness in someone else's home. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me paint you the full picture of how this beautiful disaster unfolded, because trust me, every single detail matters in this tale of petty revenge that honestly, I'm still pretty proud of. So here's what happened. Sarah calls me up one random Wednesday evening, and I can immediately tell she's been crying. Her voice is all shaky, she's sniffling between words, and she launches into this whole dramatic story about how her boyfriend of 3 years just completely blindsided her with some massive fight. Now, I'm not gonna lie, Sarah has always been a bit of a drama queen, you know the type. Everything is either the best thing ever or the absolute worst catastrophe known to mankind. But this time, something in her voice told me this was different. She was genuinely hurt, genuinely lost, and frankly, genuinely homeless for the foreseeable future. She had stormed out of their condo in the middle of this epic screaming match, grabbed nothing but her purse and her phone, and suddenly found herself with absolutely nowhere to go. Her parents live 3 states away, her close friends are either married with kids and no space, or living in tiny studio apartments that can barely fit one person, let alone 2. And so, naturally, she turns to us, her brother and his wife, basically begging for a place to crash while she figures out her next move. Now, my husband is one of those people who would literally give you the shirt off his back if you asked for it. He's got this massive soft spot for his little sister, always has, and the second he heard she was in trouble, he was already making up the guest room in his head. But me? I'm a little more, let's call it practical. I've been around Sarah long enough to know that her "just for a few days" has a tendency to turn into weeks, and her "I'll be super low-key" usually means the complete opposite. But at the same time, I'm not heartless. The woman was clearly going through it, and despite our past differences, she's family. So I agreed, but with conditions. Crystal clear, non-negotiable conditions that I thought would be pretty reasonable for any adult human being staying in someone else's home for free. The conversation went something like this. I sat her down at our kitchen table, made her a cup of tea, and said, "Sarah, of course you can stay here while you get back on your feet. We're family, and family helps family. But I need you to understand that this is our home, and we have certain ways of doing things that keep us sane and happy. I'm not trying to be difficult, I'm just trying to make sure this works for everyone involved." She nodded along, looking all grateful and understanding, so I continued. "First rule, clean up after yourself. That means dishes go in the dishwasher, not the sink. Food gets put away, not left on counters. Personal items stay in your room or the guest bathroom, not scattered around the living areas. Basically, if you use it, clean it, and if you take it out, put it back. Fair enough?" She's nodding enthusiastically. "Oh my God, absolutely, I totally get it." Second rule, quiet hours start at 10 p.m. We both have to be up early for work, and sound carries in this house. So no loud music, no phone calls, no television blasting, nothing that's gonna wake us up or keep us up. Again, pretty standard stuff. More nodding, more agreeing, she's acting like I'm being perfectly reasonable, which I was. And third rule, this is probably the most important one, absolutely no smoking inside the house. I know you smoke, and I'm not asking you to quit, but cigarettes stay outside. We don't smoke, we don't want our house smelling like smoke, and frankly, we don't want the health risks or the potential fire hazards. There's a nice little patio area where you can smoke to your heart's content, but inside is off limits. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "Of course. I totally get it, promise. These are super reasonable rules, and I really appreciate you guys letting me stay here. I swear I won't be in any trouble at all." Famous last words, right? I should have known right then and there that this was going to be a disaster, but I chose to believe her. I chose to trust that she was a grown woman who understood basic respect and common courtesy. Boy, was I wrong. The first couple days actually went pretty smoothly. Sarah was clearly still processing everything that had happened with her boyfriend. So she was mostly keeping to herself, staying in the guest room, talking quietly on the phone with friends and family. She'd come out for meals, chat with us a little bit, but generally seemed to be following the rules without any issues. I started thinking maybe I had misjudged her, maybe this whole situation was gonna work out just fine. Maybe she really had matured since the last time we'd spent extended time together. Maybe I was just being overly cautious because of past experiences. But then, day 3 happened. I woke up that morning and immediately noticed something was off. There was this faint smell lingering in the air, not overwhelming, but definitely there. It took me a few seconds to place it, but then it hit me. Cigarette smoke. In my house. I walked around trying to figure out where it was coming from. And sure enough, I found a cigarette but in the guest bathroom trash can. Not even hidden or anything, just sitting right there on top like she didn't even care if I found it. I was annoyed, but I figured maybe it was just a one-time thing. Maybe she had been really stressed the night before and made a poor decision. Maybe she forgot about the rule in a moment of emotional turmoil. So I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt and just mention it casually. When she came down for breakfast, I said, "Hey Sarah, I found a cigarette but in the guest bathroom. Trash this morning. Just a reminder that we agreed on no smoking inside the house." She looked a little embarrassed and said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I was on the phone with my mom last night and I guess I just wasn't thinking. It won't happen again." I accepted her apology and moved on, thinking we had nipped this in the bud. But then day 4 came, and with it, a whole new level of problems. I came home from work to find the kitchen looking like a tornado had hit it. Dishes piled up in the sink, food left out on the counters, the coffee maker had clearly been used but not cleaned, and there were crumbs everywhere. And that cigarette smell? It was stronger now. Much stronger. I followed the scent and realized it was coming from the living room. She had been smoking there too. At this point, I was starting to get genuinely angry, but I still tried to approach it rationally. When Sarah got home from wherever she'd been that day, I pulled her aside and said, "We need to talk. The kitchen is a mess, and I can smell cigarette smoke in the living room. We talked about this." She had the audacity to laugh it off and say, "Oh come on, it's not that bad. I'll clean it up later." Later? Later? It was already late. But I took a deep breath and said, "Sarah, I'm serious about this. These aren't unreasonable requests. I'm asking you to clean up after yourself and not smoke in our house. That's it." She rolled her eyes and said, "Fine, fine, I'll be more careful." More careful? She wasn't being careful at all. She was being completely disrespectful. Day 5 brought the trifecta of rule breaking. I came home to find the kitchen. Disaster area had somehow gotten worse. Now there were dishes from multiple meals piled up, the garbage was overflowing, and I'm pretty sure something was starting to grow on one of the plates. The cigarette smell was now so strong I could smell it from the front door. And to top it all off, her Bluetooth speaker was blasting music so loud I could hear it from the driveway. It was like she had taken my 3 simple rules and decided to break all of them simultaneously, just to see what would happen. I walked into the house, and she was sprawled out on my couch, cigarette in one hand, phone in the other, music blaring, acting like she owned the place. I stood there for a moment, just taking in the scene, feeling my blood pressure rising with every second. Finally, I walked over and said, "Sarah, we need to talk. Right now." She looked at me like I was being unreasonable and said, "What's wrong now?" "What's wrong? What's wrong?" Everything was wrong. I calmly explained, once again, that she was breaking all 3 rules simultaneously. The mess, the smoking, the noise. I pointed out that I had been patient and understanding, but this was getting ridiculous. I reminded her that she was a guest in our home, and guests don't treat their hosts' homes like personal party venues. And you know what she said to me? She laughed. She actually laughed and said, "You're starting to sound like your mom." Now, let me explain something about that comment. My mother is a lovely woman, but she's also extremely particular about her home and has very specific ways of doing things. Growing up, she was always on us about keeping things clean and organized, and while I appreciate those lessons now, at the time it felt a bit overwhelming. Sarah knew this about our family dynamic, and she was essentially calling me a control freak and comparing me to someone she knew would get under my skin. It was dismissive, disrespectful, and frankly, the last straw. I looked at her and said, "Okay. Just that. Okay." But in my head, I was thinking, "Oh, you think I'm being controlling? You think these rules are unreasonable? Let me show you what unreasonable actually looks like." I didn't say anything else at that moment. I just walked away, went to my room, and started planning my revenge. Because if she wanted to play games, I was more than happy to play along. The next morning, Sarah woke up and tried to connect to our Wi-Fi like she had been doing every day since she arrived. But instead of automatically connecting, she got a password request. She came downstairs looking confused and said, "Hey, what's wrong with the Wi-Fi? It's asking for a password." I looked up from my coffee and said, "Oh, I changed the password last night. Security update." She stood there for a moment, clearly expecting me to give her the new password, but I just went back to reading my news app on my phone. After a few more seconds of awkward silence, she said, "So? Can I have the new password?" I looked at her thoughtfully and said, I don't think so. See, I've been thinking about your comment yesterday about how I sound like my mom, and I realized you're absolutely right. I have been treating you like you're capable of following basic house rules, but clearly, you're not. So I figured, if you don't want to follow the rules, maybe you don't need the privileges that come with following them either. She stared at me like I had just spoken in a foreign language. "What do you mean?" she asked. I explained, very matter-of-factly. That Wi-Fi access was a privilege that came with being a respectful house guest. Since she had proven herself incapable of being respectful, she had lost that privilege. She started to argue, but I cut her off and said, "You're welcome to use your phone's data plan, or you can figure out how to follow the rules. Your choice." But wait, it gets better. About an hour later, she came back downstairs with a basket of laundry, clearly planning to do some washing. She walked over to the laundry room and found the door locked. She tried the handle a few times, then came to find me. "Why is the laundry room locked?" she asked. I looked up from my bookend. Said, "Oh, that. Well, I noticed you haven't been cleaning up after yourself in the kitchen, so I figured you probably don't need access to make more messes in the laundry room either. Clean clothes are a privilege for people who keep the house clean." She was starting to look genuinely panicked now. "This is ridiculous. I need to do laundry." I shrugged and said, "There's a laundromat about 2 miles down the road. They're open until 10 p.m. She stormed off, muttering under her breath about how I was being unreasonable and controlling. But I wasn't done yet. The real kicker came that evening when she tried to leave the house to go meet a friend for dinner. She walked up to the front gate, reached for where we usually keep the spare key, and found nothing. She looked around, checked her usual spots, then came back to the house looking confused and slightly frantic. "Where's the spare key to the front gate?" she asked. I looked up from the TV and said, "Oh, I put it somewhere safe." Gate access is another privilege that comes with following house rules. Now she was genuinely upset. What if there's an emergency? What if I need to get out? I pulled out my phone and showed her the Uber app. Emergency rides are about $12 to downtown. Non-emergency rides are about $8. But hey, if you can demonstrate that you're capable of following 3 simple rules, I'd be happy to give you the key back." For the first time since this whole thing started, she was speechless. She stood there for a moment, clearly trying to process what was happening, then said, "You can't be serious." I looked at her with the most serious expression I could muster, and said, "Dead serious. You said I sound like my mom? Well, this is what my mom would do if someone disrespected her home the way you've been disrespecting ours. The difference is, she would have done it on day 2. I gave you 5 days to figure it out on your own." The next day was interesting. Sarah spent most of the morning in her room, probably using her phone data to complain to her friends about how unreasonable I was being. But as the day went on, I could see the reality of the situation starting to sink in. She was essentially trapped in the house with no internet, no way to do laundry, and no independent way to leave. She tried to ask my husband to intervene, but he just shrugged and said, "She asked you to follow 3 rules. Were they unreasonable?" When she couldn't answer that question, he walked away. By evening, she was getting desperate. She asked if she could borrow my laptop to check her email, and I said, "Sorry, but letting people use my personal devices is a privilege I reserve for people who respect my home." She asked if she could use the house phone to call her friend, and I said, "The house phone is for emergencies only. If you need to make social calls, you can use your cell phone." She was starting to realize that her choices were to either follow the rules or live in a very uncomfortable bubble of isolation. Day 2 of my revenge was even better. Sarah woke up and immediately started cleaning the kitchen. Not just cleaning up her own mess, but actually deep cleaning the entire space. She wiped down counters, organized the pantry, scrubbed the coffee maker, and even mopped the floor. When she was done, she came to find me and said, "I cleaned the kitchen. Can I have the Wi-Fi password now?" I looked at the kitchen, nodded approvingly, and said, "That's great. 1 rule down, 2 to go." She looked frustrated but not surprised. "What about the laundry room?" she asked. I explained that the laundry room would be unlocked when she had gone 24 hours without smoking inside the house. "And the gate key?" she asked. I told her the gate key would be returned when she had demonstrated that she could follow all 3 rules consistently for a full week. I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was doing the math, realizing that she had created this situation for herself, and figuring out what it was going to take to get out of it. Part of me felt a little bad for her, but then I remembered the dismissive laugh, the "you sound like your mom" comment, and the complete disrespect she had shown for our home and our hospitality. This wasn't about being cruel, this was about teaching a lesson that clearly needed to be taught. By day 3, something had shifted. Sarah was not only following the rules, but she was going above and beyond. She was cleaning up after herself immediately, she was taking her smoke breaks outside without being reminded, and she was keeping the noise level down even during the day. She even started doing little things like taking out the trash and wiping down the bathroom sink after she used it. It was like she had transformed from an inconsiderate house guest into a model roommate overnight. But the real moment of victory came on day 4. Sarah approached me that morning with a look of defeat mixed with determination. She had been following all the rules perfectly, she had gone more than 24 hours without smoking inside, and she was clearly ready to do whatever it took to get her privileges back. She stood in front of me and said, "I've been following all the rules. I cleaned up after myself, I haven't smoked inside, and I've been quiet during quiet hours. Can I please have the Wi-Fi password and the laundry room key?" I looked at her thoughtfully and said, "You know what? You're right. You have been following the rules. But I think we need to make sure you understand why these rules matter. They're not arbitrary punishments or power trips. They're basic respect for the people who are letting you stay in their home for free. So if you want your privileges back, I need you to say, 'I will follow the Queen's rules in the Queen's castle.'" She stared at me for a moment, clearly debating whether this was a hill she wanted to die on. I could see her pride warring with her desperation for Wi-Fi access and clean clothes. Finally, she took a deep breath and muttered, "I will follow the Queen's rules in the Queen's castle." It was said with all the enthusiasm of a teenager being forced to apologize to their sibling, but she said it. I smiled and handed her a piece of paper with the Wi-Fi password written on it. "Welcome back to the land of the connected," I said. "The laundry room key is on the counter, and you'll get the gate key back at the end of the week if you keep this up." She took the paper, looked at it like it was made of gold, and actually said, "Thank you." Not sarcastic thank you, not begrudging thank you, but genuine thank you. The rest of her stay was completely different. She followed every rule without being reminded, she contributed to household chores without being asked, and she was generally pleasant to be around. She even started cooking dinner for all of us a couple times a week, which was a nice gesture that showed she was actually grateful for our hospitality. It was like she had remembered how to be a good house guest, and frankly, how to be a decent human being. About a week later, she announced that she had worked things out with her boyfriend and would be moving back to their place. She thanked us for letting her stay, apologized for being difficult at the beginning, and said she had learned a lot about respect and boundaries during her time with us. I believed her, because her actions had backed up her words. The morning she left, she gave me a hug and said, "I'm sorry I was such a pain in the ass. You were right to call me out on it. I needed to learn that lesson, and I'm actually grateful you taught it to me the way you did." It was probably the most mature thing I had ever heard her say, and it made me feel like maybe this whole experience had been worth it. Looking back on this whole situation, I realized that what I did might seem harsh to some people. Taking away someone's Wi-Fi, locking the laundry room, hiding the gate key, these might seem like extreme measures. But sometimes, when someone is being completely disrespectful and dismissive of your boundaries, you have to get creative to make your point. Words clearly weren't working. Patient reminders weren't working. The only thing that got through to her was experiencing the consequences of her actions in a way that directly impacted her daily life. The thing is, I wasn't trying to be cruel or vindictive. I was trying to teach a lesson about respect and boundaries that clearly needed to be taught. Sarah had gotten comfortable treating our home like her personal playground, and she needed to understand that actions have consequences. Sometimes those consequences are uncomfortable, but that's how people learn. I think a lot of us struggle with setting boundaries, especially with family members. We worry about being seen as mean or controlling, so we let things slide that we shouldn't let slide. We make excuses for behavior that we would never tolerate from a stranger. But the truth is, family members should be held to higher standards, not lower ones. They should be more respectful of your boundaries, not less. What I learned from this experience is that sometimes being kind means being firm. Sometimes being loving means not enabling bad behavior. Sometimes being family means calling each other out when we're being jerks. Sarah needed someone to hold her accountable for her actions, and I needed to stop being afraid of conflict and start standing up for my own boundaries. The other thing I learned is that most people, even the ones who seem completely self-centered and inconsiderate, are capable of change when they're properly motivated. Sarah wasn't a bad person. She was just someone who had gotten comfortable being inconsiderate because no one had ever made her face the consequences of that behavior. Once she experienced what it felt like to lose privileges because of her actions, she was able to connect the dots and change her behavior accordingly. I'm not saying my method is the only way to handle this kind of situation, but it worked for us. Sarah learned to respect our home and our boundaries. I learned to stand up for myself without feeling guilty about it, and our relationship is actually stronger now because of it. She knows I won't be a pushover, and I know she's capable of being respectful when she chooses to be. The funny thing is, this whole experience has actually made me more confident in setting boundaries with other people too. I used to worry so much about being liked and avoiding conflict that I would let people walk all over me. But seeing how effective it was to simply enforce consequences for disrespectful behavior has made me realize that boundaries aren't mean, they're necessary. They're how we teach people how to treat us, and they're how we protect our own mental health and peace of mind. So if you're dealing with someone who's disrespecting your boundaries, whether it's a family member, a friend, or anyone else, remember that you have the right to protect your space and your peace. You don't have to put up with behavior that makes you uncomfortable just because you're worried about being seen as difficult. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to hold them accountable for their actions, even if it's uncomfortable for both of you. And remember, you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Your home is your sanctuary, and you have every right to establish rules that protect that sanctuary. Anyone who can't respect those basic boundaries probably doesn't deserve access to your space or your hospitality in the first place. The moral of this story? Don't mistake kindness for weakness, and don't let anyone convince you that having standards is the same as being controlling. Sometimes people need to learn lessons the hard way, and sometimes you're the one who needs to teach them. Just make sure you're teaching from a place of love and boundaries, not from a place of anger and revenge. Alright, that's my story about how I turned my sister-in-law from a disrespectful house guest into a respectful human being using nothing but logical consequences and a little bit of creative problem solving. If you enjoyed this tale of petty revenge with a purpose, make sure to smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want to hear more stories like this one. And if you've got your own stories about setting boundaries with difficult family members, drop them in the comments below. I love reading about how other people handle these kinds of situations, and I'm sure other viewers would love to hear your experiences too. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Trust me, I've got plenty more where this came from, and they just keep getting better. Until next time, remember, your boundaries matter, your peace matters, and anyone who can't respect both doesn't deserve access to either. Peace out.